Facebook and Live. And welcome to 4.340s on Friday with Katie and
Ziz. Welcome, everyone. Happy Friday. We have some interesting things to talk about today. And Katie and I we are always like, why didn't we push record sooner?
That's usually what Ziz says.
Yeah, definitely. You know, we're talking about, I was just telling a quick story to Katie about my standing out a bit. And part of it is my name. So my name being Azizuddin Abdul-Rauf kind of helps you to stand out. It definitely isn't John or Joe or last name Jones. And consequently, because of that, I automatically stood out. And I realized early on in my life, or back then in my life, standing out is kind of cool. And I didn't try to fit in because that's what everyone else was trying to do, is try to fit in. And then, of course, later on in life, you look back and you go, oh, okay, I get it now. So we think, or I wouldn't say I think standing out helps you to become you, which leads to authenticity, which is one of the things I wanted to talk about today.
Yeah. And before we talk about authenticity, what comes up for me as you share this amazing childhood story of just owning your differences, is my lack of confidence to do so. I would get up an hour early just to wash and dry my hair, put it in curlers, like make it look good, put on makeup. I just like everyone else. And the confidence to stand out was really scary, which is what we had talked about before we hopped on here today. And, you know, when you are different as a kid, because the school system is designed for us all to get in line, everyone knows the kid that's in trouble all the time, right? No one wants to hang out with that kid. I see it in teacher threads in Facebook where they'll talk about nobody wants to work with this kid because this kid is an insert whatever explicitive thing they're going to say about the kid. Like standing out as a kid feels scary. And then you get to your 40s and all of a sudden you've met so many people that when you meet someone that's different, you're like, oh, this is cool. Tell me more. It's like there's this, and this isn't something that everyone struggles with. But women in particular, I think we really struggle with that confidence of being so different than those that came before us even. I felt like an imposter with my hair. I had a woman once tell me my hair looked like I just maybe had sex. This is, something that just a stranger would tell me about my hair. And so that doesn't look very professional. What CEO would take me seriously? Who would want to be coached by someone? And then I would hop onto these corporate coaching calls with a bunch of coaches. I'm like, I do not look like these people. And that helps people remember you.
Yeah. And it's interesting, going to confidence. And I don't even, especially you go back, you think high school, if we're talking about that age, or even middle school, middle school to high school. And of course, it was completely different than it is now in some respects. And we didn't have the constant reminder of information. That's how I look at social media. Like the TV channel is distributing information all the time to you. So we didn't have that, fortunately. But we did have our classmates, and they would bombard you with information. And which I think for me, and it would help my confidence is I stayed pretty consistent in how I treated other people. And that came from like my parents, this is how you treat people. And even though, I'll be blunt, I remember my dad, like if I were to ask my dad, like, did he like white people? He'd probably say no. And I understand why. And it's because of how he was treated by those people. And he's someone who served in the military and faced a ton of isms, so to speak. But despite that, he didn't hold that over me and said, you shouldn't like so-and-so because they are this. He taught me, you treat people how you want to be treated. And that was the way I looked at other people. And I think sports had a lot to do with that as well, because you start to learn the differentiation between well, first, if you want to win, you have to figure out how to come together as a team. and how to put those differences aside for that shared goal of trying to win. And I think, looking big picture, when I think about the teams who are successful, their locker room is pretty tight, and they genuinely, if they don't like each other, they definitely respect each other. And consequently, because of that, they can win. And I think that's the beauty of sports to me, especially team sports, because you learn those types of things. It's how to respect one another and how to come together for that shared vision. And of course, you have a coach in the background that's helping you get there. So they see the big picture and they help guide it.
Yeah. When you talk about staying consistent in how you treat people, that's authenticity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
not the surface authenticity, the real aspect of authenticity.
Yeah. Authenticity. When I coach women around authenticity, oftentimes we're and it does, it does want to go there. Like, I want to be in the place where authenticity is, that my hair gets to show up how it wants to show up. Right. I want to have that authenticity. And I think that authenticity has to start with ourselves and looking at where are we not being authentic with ourselves. And perfectionism was what I was chasing with that hair, because that was the hairstyle that was in. And when I let go of valuing myself in these other ways, when I let go of perfectionism, what I'm really doing is I'm picking up authenticity. Yeah. And becoming a leader is synonymous with becoming yourself. And becoming yourself means you need to know who that is and what that looks like. And you talked about trust and building that trust, and this is how you win. And when you talked about that, I always think about my classroom or a corporate team, because all of them are doing the same thing. This trust is the foundation. And you said you have to set aside your differences. And I find it so interesting how difficult it is sometimes for teachers to set aside their differences of the students, in order to kind of bring people together to win. And that's being authentic about, I don't know how to teach you. Tell me how to teach you, right? Instead of, let me try 85 things that I've known to work. And then I'm like, well, I've exhausted everything. I haven't tried everything. You talk about your dad and helping you grow authenticity. My mom helped me understand how to have a conversation with an adult that didn't know how to teach you. Because in first grade, when I put 0 and 1 for all my math answers, mom asked, did you ask her why? And the teacher said, no. Teacher never bothered to ask me. Teacher decided I didn't know how to do math. So same thing when you're in corporate, you got to ask your people, how do you learn? How do you grow? What works for you?
What a concept, right? Asking questions. Because it may lead, and then it's interesting because some people don't want the feedback. They don't want the information because then they have to acknowledge it.
Yeah. So, and that builds so much trust. And, every coach in a locker room is told an inspiring story. And this is how you build trust. I know you've got the best stories about trust.
And what's interesting, and when you have, depending on if you're in a collegiate locker room or a high school locker room or professional locker room, every coach, they will look to certain individuals who have the most inspiring stories, so to speak. And then there will be the individual coach who does it just with their own group, and they have their role. And I think that's the beauty of a head coach, is when they understand how to utilize the strengths of each coach and who to call upon. It's a beautiful thing. And I liken it to, so the Super Bowl was 2-3 weeks ago, and the Chiefs won. But one of the plays in which the Chiefs scored a touchdown, they lined up in the wrong formation. They were in the wrong formation. And the beauty of, so they're on offense, they line up in the wrong formation. And despite that, they still executed the play and scored a touchdown. And you have to wonder, you're like, wow, why were they able to do that? So it comes down to trust. The individuals knowing how to adapt in the moment to execute on the fly. And that's hard to do, but it requires practice. So they had to do that before they got to the big game. And that's where working with a
Mm.
coach or working with individuals or a mentor comes into play, is practicing those things that you can't necessarily see in your blind spot.
And on the fly. I love that you said that. So much of how we support people in their professional development is that we have simulations, we have scenarios, we have these practice things. And now, while that's important to prime your brain so that it doesn't feel scary in the moment, I don't do that. I have my clients go out and execute on the fly. So you're going to go do this in your next meeting. You're going to model. I think my favorite part of storytelling is that you're modeling, through your own stories, what leadership looks like. And that always goes back to your authenticity. It goes back to becoming yourself. And so, what we model is what we get more of. So if you are, struggling with your people, I had a woman that got feedback from her boss today, and I was laughing, and I'm like, this is feedback about her. I already know that. And I don't know your boss, and I haven't talked to you in 2 months because you've been busy, but I already know that to be true because the feedback was about how she needed to focus on her lower performers. And this woman, the boss, was overly focused on her highest performer, which was my client. And so oftentimes, feedback is great information for us to understand other people as well as where they're at. And then so now we have a story because she's given feedback. And so now the story for how you model that is to go back then and talk to your boss about how you are going to be cutting back on your time with her so that you can focus on your low performers. And so your boss can focus on their low performers. You talk about the coach, like knowing how to get the best out of all the different people. And that's what teaching is. That is why I loved, 30 kids, my 52 minutes, bring in the next group. Every single one of those had 30 different humans in there with something different to bring to the table.
Yeah. And when they're allowed to tell their story, that builds trust.
Yeah.
And it's, you just reminded me earlier in the week, I spoke to a teacher and I said, share your story about the things that you're falling short on as far as, there were some fitness things we were talking about, and she did. And it helped it humanized her in front of her students. And then the students, of course, they typically were always sharing stories, but the teacher wasn't reciprocating and being vulnerable and sharing her story. So yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that point about the storytelling because it's so important. And of course, the modeling, that's gold.
Yeah. And so when you stay consistent in how you treat people, you are modeling to people how they will treat you because you'll be consistent about how you show up. And all of that creates more authenticity, and all of that builds confidence. So if we were to give some coaching performance tips on trying to be less perfectionist, because this is the one that comes up, or the imposter syndrome. These are my two favorite. Magic wand today. We can get rid of them all right here. So authenticity is own where you are an imposter and what makes it great. And what I own about being an imposter in corporate, because I have less self-management I have to do when I'm coaching, because I don't have the trauma that you've had in those places.
Yeah.
If I'm coaching a teacher, I have a lot more self-management to do. And self-management for me means, and authenticity means, I will authentically just be a coach. I cannot advise. I cannot mentor. If you ask me what I think, my response will be, well, let me tell you what I heard you think. For me, authenticity when I self-manage is making sure that I am just a coach. And what makes me great in corporate is that when someone says, I've exhausted all things, I've tried everything, I can say, would you like one more? Can I offer a solution? So I get to put on a little bit more of an advisor hat occasionally. And because I taught adults, I have a lot of really good tools to support you.
Yeah. And it's, what we typically come back to is, of course, awareness of self and how you're showing up. And of course, you mentioned the word consistency. I mean, that in and of itself is especially when you work with young people, if you're not consistent, they typically let you know, Miss Eads, Mr. Ziz,
Yeah.
you
And you know
did
what?
this
There's
differently
nothing
last week.
wrong. I have to say, because I know 68% of us are designed to have inconsistencies, inconsistent willpower. I think what becomes important is that when you're inconsistent, that you own it, and that becomes really authentic. And so if a kid is calling me out, Miss Seeds, I can own that. And I don't always have to have a reason for that inconsistency, but I can have a conversation with that kid afterwards about it.
Bada bing, bada boom. I mean, really, it's as simple as that. Just own it. And that in and of itself creates the trust, because you're acknowledging what's being said to you and what's being shared to you. And I think that's where young people, because they see things and they're like, oh, these adults, they're such hypocrites, because you're not being consistent with yourself.
Yeah. And
you're
so
not
back to
owning
that.
up to it.
And so back to that feedback I mentioned before. So for that client to own it and say, I do want to support to own that low performer, and then to push that ball back to her boss then and say, in order to do so, I'm going to need to own a little bit less of being your high performer.
Yeah.
And there's a really authentic way to do that. And having that conversation with this particular client, it was very clear then. And so Ziz, I'd love some performance coaching tips from you on, tell us, how do you be authentic with scary adults?
As a child or as an adult?
As an adult, that's where they get scarier. I think as children, the adults are a little less scarier.
It's interesting. I think just even how you phrased it, scary, what's scary? And it's like, if you're going to be operating from that point of like, whoa, that person.
So can I tell you what our brain says is scary? Is scarf. So the status perception is scary. The certainty is scary. The autonomy is feeling a little scary. So they're putting their thumb down on you. Perhaps you're not relating very well, and you can just feel, this person hates me. This person doesn't like me. Maybe you just know that this person doesn't like you because they've talked about you, or it doesn't feel fair that this person XYZ. So those are what I mean when I say scary, because our brain doesn't know the difference between the bear and the human. It just feels scared.
Yeah. So when you reframe it and put it in those terms, what comes to mind is the information that is being shared with me sometimes isn't delivered in the best way for me to hear it at that point in time. So I typically is like, okay, I'm looking at what's being said and what's being shared or modeled as this person is trying to support me and trying to get better. And when I look at it that way, I try to say, okay, what is it that's being said that I can either use, or is it going to help me get better? Instead of being like, God, I can't believe they're saying it to me. Why are they saying it to me? And so
what if this person doesn't genuinely want you to get better? What if this person doesn't really like you?
So with me, with a healthy dose of confidence, and sometimes that happens, but I think the gift sometimes is when there is someone like that for me, it affirms that I'm doing what it is that I need to do. And I think probably my way of assessing myself is always looking at where I am, what am I doing, how am I doing? And that's a part I think I've learned from sports, is that feedback. I mean, in practice, we were filmed. You get graded in the game, you get graded in practice. So it was always constant feedback. And because I've had coaches who delivered with really flowery language, and then some coaches' language was like, whoa, hold on. I learned that it wasn't always, it's how I receive it. I get to choose how
That's bringing the power back to you, which is something that we both have talked about before on, allowing someone who's not here for you to impact you is giving your power to that person.
Right.
And it's okay if you're sitting here right now and you realize you're giving your power away. You can just take that back right now.
And it's hard. It's hard work.
So I think it's a yes, and yes, it's hard when you don't know where you're giving it away. It's like a garden hose that the water's not coming out and you don't know why. But if you go and find where the kink is in the garden hose, now the water's there and you can just put it wherever you want. Don't water the cactus. Those are the people that are not for, they'll drown and what have you. So I think, yes, it's hard because we don't always know where we've given our power away.
Yeah.
But if you start to look at the areas where relationships are our greatest teacher, where do we get triggered? Where do we feel a particular way? Those are areas for us to go and unkink our hose and say, all right, let's not give our power to that person. And that's why I love I am rubber and you're glue, and everything you say bounces off of me and sticks to you. And if I overly identify with anything someone tells me, good or bad or middle, right? Then I don't, when a woman says to me the thing about my hair, like I laughed in that moment, but I also was like, this will be a good comedy routine, because that would spice, like some people would be really spicy about that.
Yeah.
And I know why she said it. I know what her intention was. I'm very aware that she may or may not have gone on a date with a guy I was with, that what have you. It was a really weird situation. But I'm not, that's bouncing off of me. Like, right. That's not something that I'm allowing to even like stick. And the things that do stick, we also need to like clean our rubber off, because we don't need to keep those. They're
Right.
information for us to then wipe away once we've used it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so that the empower yourself, and which means constantly, maybe not so constantly, because I think sometimes we have to give ourselves space to grow and give ourselves space to feel, to really feel what's actually happening, and to think about why am I feeling this way? Why is my body tensing up? Why are my shoulders up to my ears? And I think sometimes when you ask people those questions, like how is stress showing up in your body, they're like, well, I'm stressed, really? And you see them in their facial expression, and they're unaware. And awareness is really important. And that's probably something we can talk about another time. But I definitely love the fact that we hit authenticity, confidence, trust, and storytelling. And going back to what's the story we're telling ourselves about how we show up each and every day.
Or what's the story that you're telling yourself about authenticity, and really getting clear for yourself. Sometimes authenticity and self-awareness, they're kind of hanging out together.
Absolutely.
And it's not the surface level stuff. I will say, felt much more authentic not having to spend hours on my hair. If you've met me, I am very much the more sleep I can get before I need to be somewhere, the least amount of time it takes me to get ready really sets me up for success. And I've been on time a lot more in my life since I gave up the need to have this whole hour routine. And it feels very authentic for me. So check out where you're being unaware of your own self. I think those are always good questions to ask. Ziz, thank you so much for your performance stories today. Love hearing your stories of how much you just receive feedback, probably better than 95% of Americans, if not more, or humans probably. So thank you for sharing and modeling for us.
Thank you, Katie. And it's the mindset and the willingness to practice it. And that's how I look at it. It's trying to improve, and it's having that growth mindset of, okay, I can grow, and here's how I can grow. And sometimes that means hearing hard things. And I think my children have taught me that. So anyway, yeah, it's been a fun ride, because I do like learning. And I think you've heard me talk about this before. Bocce for me over the last couple of years, because it was a new sport, something I was completely new at. And because it was new, it gave me that like, ooh, I'm so good at this. I need to work at it. And
I love that you brought that up. Because that's why I did the dealing blackjack. I'm like, I'm really bad at this, and that is not authentic. I am choosing to be bad at this, and I will get better. So I love that you brought that up.
Yeah.
And I gotta go. 4.340 on Fridays. We are out of time. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye, everyone. Reach out.